xpetu's master thesis on League of Legends. Counterpoint here, he doesn't factor in champion mastery skill players' bias from buying other items, which Freak inherently says is why the most bought item picked runes are often the best despite having... Hold on. Let me try to understand this. Wait. So, counterpoint here, he doesn't factor in champion mastery skilled player bias from buying other items, which Freak inherently says is why the most bought item picked runes are often the best despite having lower win rate. He does never mention selection bias, though, which impacts this. He does mention selection bias, though, which impacts this, but you have to also buying a win more item when you are ahead. You should expect your win rate to increase further than by buying another item. So even though this video is extremely interesting, I'm not sure. Okay, I don't know if I actually should react to this video. Although I did just talk about xpetu, Pito, I don't even know.
Win rate when purchased as the first legendary item on Shen in League of Legends. Does this mean that the item is good? No. Good players will actually tell you that, oh yeah, Heartsteel's win rate is inflated because it's a win more item, so it is purchased in winning situations. During the past 6 months, I wrote a 40-page master's thesis explaining why item statistics are flawed and how they can be improved. But let's see what Riot Freak thinks about Shen's item win rate statistics.
Generally speaking, if you dig in and you say, oh, well, if you buy his third most common starting item, his win rate's actually 2% higher, that is almost always fake data. Any item that is not his most built item has a default inflated win rate because only players who are smart enough to identify this item as good are the ones who are buying it, which means they are already inflating the win rate by being good at the champion.
Freak is one of the most knowledgeable people about League of Legends statistics. He's worked on the game for so many years, he's casted the game, he's talked about the game ever since it began, right? But these statements are still just human intuition. Maybe Riot Games has some data that I don't. Most likely they actually have a lot of data that I don't. But I've been looking into item win rates, and I think people understand when they look at, for example, Mei's win rate, right? You see that, okay, Mei's has 75% win rate, second item, I don't know, Orianna, Syndra, you know? People can justify that. They're like, okay, well, it makes sense because Mei's is a win more item. You purchase it only in situations when you are ahead, okay? So people then say that, oh, yeah, you don't need to look at Mei's win rate, right? But you can come up with the same logic for every single item and every single champion. Let's say you look at Varus, first item Locket, okay? Is it really good? People have been building Varus Locket first item. And I have top lane Varus in this game as well. But like, is it a good thing? It has a high win rate, but is the high win rate because the item is good? Or is it just because good players are building it? Because they watched Lol Dobby's video on Locket Rush Varus top lane. We cannot know this for sure by just looking at the win rate data. All right?
True.
Because the win rate data is biased. I will get a little bit more technical now, but I will make it so that everyone can understand it, okay? So whenever...
So one thing that I immediately want to think about is when VigarV2 did an experiment where he asked players to play a champion and build a certain way. And there was a sample size of, I want to say about 1,500 games, or like maybe there was a little bit more than that. And a win rate was obviously accrued for this specific itemization path, right? And the win rate was actually high. Now, one of the things that immediately goes into it is the type of people that will follow VigarV2 and listen to an item video or like one of his item, Twitter video things, etc., and then go into ranked games and play the game is a different breed of player than your everyday person. They're having intention behind their actions. They understand the purpose of what they're trying to gravitate towards, and they know what they're doing more than just the random Joe Schmo that's just randomly picking up items. And so this is where you have to be able to parse data, and you have to be able to separate certain things, and you have to be able to factor in a lot of different things when looking at stuff like this. And I think this is like sort of like what is being touched upon here, unless like I'm misunderstanding something, because I do think that this is a really interesting aspect, and it's a really interesting conversation that actually doesn't get had enough analytically.
Decides to purchase an item in League of Legends. That's a selection. It's a human selection, okay? So selection bias will be involved naturally. That just means that I'm not randomly choosing my items. There is some kind of logic that I do, and I am a biased person, okay? So I am making biased decisions.
I like the inclusion of, you know, known terminologies and expressions like this. This is something that obviously I used to do years ago when, like, referring to why certain champions get picked or why certain champions don't get picked, such as, like, social conformity bias, social confirmation bias, these types of things, right? I like using stuff like this because it's sort of like a weapon when you use it properly that renders the defenders in a much more difficult position because oftentimes they're the ones arguing from feeling because they're not engaging actually with the subject matter.
I'm a biased person, okay? So I am making biased decisions. That translates into the win rate data directly. An example of this is Mei's win rate, right? It's high because it's purchased in winning games. An alternative would be an item such as Sunfire Aegis for Shen, which is a safe defensive item. That might be purchased more often in games where you are losing. And in fact, I have data here to show this. So I'm looking at my thesis right now, and I have computed something called the initial win probability, or in the context of League of Legends, it's the purchase win probability. And the purchase win probability of Sunfire Aegis as the first item for Shen is 50.53%. Okay, remember this number for now. Now I will explain what it means. In sports analytics, so baseball, if you've seen the movie...
How long do we have till next game?
That's a movie about sports analytics.
Right, we're still doing good on time.
There's a common method called win probability estimation. And what that means is we're simply interested in the fact that, okay, we have team A and we have team B. And we want to know which team is winning and with what probability. You might have seen this, okay? You might have seen this before. If you watched my channel, you know about coaches, okay? So we've done some win probability estimation before. If you watched the 2023 LoL World Championships, you saw their win probability estimates, okay? But until now, I have not seen a good application for these. And this is where stuff gets really interesting, okay? Purchase win probability describes the average situation in which an item is purchased. Therefore, you can use it to deduce whether or not an item is purchased when behind or ahead, typically. So if we look at Heartsteel's purchase win probability, it is 53.66% compared to 50.53% for Sunfire Aegis. That means that whenever you purchase Heartsteel, we actually have data showing that you are 4% more likely at the time of purchase to be already winning the game. In other words, you are ahead in the game. And previously, using just naive win rate data, you didn't know this for sure. So you might not know what the situation is when an item is purchased. Okay? And this is really interesting now. So if we have access to win probability estimation models, there are some good papers. For example, Kim et al. 2021 describes the implementation of a deep neural net network that is well calibrated for the win probability estimation. I will not explain calibration or neural network calibration in detail in this video, but know that there are methods that are reliable for estimating the win probability at each time step. Okay? So by using these win probability estimates, we can actually compute the unbiased estimate of impact for each item.
So,
and this is something called...
That's really weird to me. Okay, so the thing... okay, so the thing about that, what he just said, is it's weird to me because of the acknowledgement of introduction of new information. So if a game if you take a game timer and you take a screenshot and you're like, okay, this is the probability at this game timer, that is based upon the data that is based upon the current understanding over whatever large sample size, current understanding of the holistic player base, okay? and then it spits out that number. But that doesn't that doesn't make it an accurate representation, because of, and I talked about this, and I can't remember what video it was that I ended up talking about this in. Perhaps I actually talked about this in the really long Twitter thread that I made a couple of weeks ago, where the introduction of new information forever alters stats and almost renders them meaningless, in a way where, so for instance, so let's take, for example, like, let me just use Smash Melee as an analogy really quickly. So if you go back in time, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, Donkey Kong is an absolute bottom tier champion, right? Or character, whatever you want to call him. You can't play Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong is really bad. And so whatever data you would take, okay, or like an AI or whatever, and you would have it read everything and spit out like, what is Donkey Kong's chance to win this match against Fox or Falco or, you know, Sheik or whatever, it would spit out random numbers based on, again, that holistic thing. Now, if you were to take the modern day Donkey Kong players and you were to port them back to that time period, all that data is meaningless because they just simply know things that people that aren't playing against them or of that era don't know about. Now, the thing is that when you view this in a microcosm, you can have players that understand the game on a higher level relative to their peers, and so in isolation, the data that is being suggested isn't accurate, because those players are able to make use of things that are not able to be factored in through the total data, and it would render the answer meaningless. So like another really good example of this that, you know, I would always sometimes bring up is like Savior, who's sort of like, you know, taboo to talk about in Korea, but like Savior was like really iconic because there was a period in StarCraft 1 tournaments where Zergs had a 30% win rate. Okay, all pro Zergs, all. Okay, so if you take all the pro leagues, okay, every major pro tournament, right, you take the preliminaries, you take the offline tournaments, you take the majors, etc. All pro Zergs have a 30% win rate against Terran on, you know, these 5 maps, okay? And they cannot beat Terran. Well, those Zergs can't do what Savior did. So what ended up happening is like Savior, and maybe a couple of other Zergs didn't have a 30% win rate, but Savior had a 70 to like 77% win rate versus Terran, because Savior had more knowledge of what to do in various different spots. So the data doesn't fucking matter in spots like this. And this is why, and also I was talking to an AI engineer recently, actually, about this particular topic. In fact, I also just answered an AI engineer question in one of the patron Q&A videos that we just started doing again that are now weekly. And this stuff gets actually complex. I don't know if I'm supposed to do a lecture, actually, at one of the top universities in Korea, one of the Sky universities, Yonsei. I've been asked to do a lecture on game theory, and then as a secondary part to the lecture, or like a second lecture, kind of, but they're being done at the same time, manifestation of human personality through gameplay. So I've been invited, which is like a very prestigious invite to receive. And so I'm preparing for that. And so I'm doing actually quite a lot of research on like various topics of just a ton of different stuff. And like, so the data thing is actually a really interesting one, where, yes, I'm not going to use the most technical terms, like obviously xpetu is actually, you know, pulling up some things inside of the video and whatnot. But there's a lot of interesting conversations and subject matter and material that you can get into that I think is very fascinating for a lot of people. Are we in draft? We are in draft. Okay. I'm going to pause the video there and we will come back to it. I hope this is interesting for you guys. I don't know. See, this is the stuff that like, it does interest me, but also it like kills me, and like, it like, I don't know, man. All right, we're in draft. Okay.
By getting rid of the collie.